I'll never forget the first time I visited St. Andrew's Cathedral in Edinburgh. It was a crisp winter evening, and the Gothic architecture loomed above, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. The cathedral had always fascinated me, with its towering spires and intricate stonework, a relic of the past steeped in history. But it wasn't the cathedral's grandeur that haunted me that night. It was the whispers that surrounded it, the stories of tragic love and a restless spirit. I had heard the tale before, but it was only when I stood inside that I truly understood the weight of it. The story of Eliza, the lonely bride of St. Andrew's Cathedral, had captivated the locals for over half a century. They said her ghost still roamed the cathedral, lost in the pain of a love betrayed. I wanted to see for myself if there was any truth to it. As I wandered through the dimly lit interior, the smell of aged wood and incense filled the air. The tall, arched windows cast long streaks of light across the stone floor, creating an eerie glow. The cathedral was nearly empty that night, save for a few visitors milling about. I found myself drawn toward the bell tower. I had heard the rumors that if you lingered there long enough, you might catch a glimpse of her, Eliza, the ghostly bride in white, gazing out from the tower window, lost in her sorrow. The story had been etched in my mind as I learned it years ago. It was 1887 when Eliza, a young woman full of love and hope, arrived at St. Andrew's Cathedral with her fiancé, Charles, for a quiet ceremony. They had been planning the wedding for months, and everything seemed perfect. The cathedral was a place of peace and beauty, a perfect setting for their vows to each other. But something dark lingered in the air that night. Charles had been distant, cold even, and Eliza had noticed it. She attributed it to the stress of the upcoming ceremony, but as the evening wore on, her unease grew. Charles had retreated into the shadows during the reception, and Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She searched for him in the corners of the cathedral, but he was nowhere to be found. The clock struck midnight, and as the bell tolled through the vast church, she decided to confront him, but what she found shattered her world. In the darkness of the cathedral, Eliza found Charles in the arms of another woman, whispering sweet promises of love and devotion. The betrayal cut deep, and as Eliza stood there in shock, the woman's laughter echoed in her ears. Her heart broke. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, couldn't comprehend that the man she loved, the man who was supposed to be her partner for life, was with another woman. The anger and sadness rose inside her like a tidal wave, and she felt the ground beneath her feet slip away. Without thinking, she turned and fled from the scene, her heart pounding as she raced up the steps of the bell tower. It was the only place she felt she could escape, a place where the world would fall away, where she could make sense of what had happened. As she reached the top of the tower, she could hear the distant sounds of revelers below, their laughter and cheers a stark contrast to the agony she felt. The bell rang out one last time that night, and in that moment, Eliza made a choice. She didn't want to live in a world where love could be so cruel. She threw herself from the tower, the wind rushing past her as the ground rushed up to meet her. Her death was a tragedy that sent shockwaves through the cathedral and the town. Eliza's family mourned her loss, but the whispers of betrayal and sorrow continued. And soon, the rumors began. People said they could hear her soft cries echoing through the cathedral at night, a mournful sound that chilled the soul. Others claimed to see her figure, dressed in a white wedding gown, wandering the church, her face twisted in sadness. The bride, they said, never left the cathedral. She had become a part of it, forever trapped in her pain. I had heard these stories growing up, but standing in the cathedral that night, I felt the weight of them in a way I hadn't expected. There was something unsettling about the stillness in the air, a quiet sadness that seemed to hang over everything. I made my way toward the bell tower, my curiosity growing with each step. The soft hum of the bells had faded, leaving only silence. But as I climbed the narrow stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was as if someone was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. When I reached the top, I stood there for a moment, peering out over the city. The streets below were bathed in the soft glow of street lamps, and the distant sound of voices drifted up to me. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. The faintest figure, barely visible, standing at the far end of the tower window. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer, the air growing colder with each passing second. It was a woman in a white dress, her silhouette barely visible in the gloom. Her hair was long and dark, cascading over her shoulders like a veil. But what struck me the most was her face. It was pale, gaunt, her features twisted in sorrow. She was staring out into the distance, her gaze lost in something far beyond the horizon. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. There was something about her that felt wrong, something otherworldly that made my skin crawl. And then, just as suddenly as I had seen her, she vanished, melting into the shadows of the tower. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, the feeling of dread intensifying. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with questions. Was it really her? Was Eliza's spirit still wandering the cathedral, trapped in her grief? And if so, what was it she wanted from me? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I was not alone in that tower. I finally made my way back down the stairs, my hands trembling. The silence around me felt suffocating, as though the cathedral itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the image of the bride from my mind. Even now, as I recall the events of that night, I can still feel the cold, the weight of her presence lingering in the air. As I left St. Andrew's Cathedral, the bell tolled once more, its deep sound echoing through the streets. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing in the tower window, waiting. But the cathedral stood silent, its Gothic spires reaching toward the sky. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eliza was still there, wandering the halls, her heart broken and her soul lost in the shadows of St. Andrew's Cathedral. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind whispers through the streets, I can almost hear her soft cries, drifting through the air, a reminder that some spirits never find peace. It was a cold, wet evening in late October, 2015, the kind of night when the rain doesn't just fall, but seems to drench the very soul. I had recently bought a house in the outskirts of New Orleans. It had stood vacant for decades, but the moment I saw it, I knew it was where I wanted to live. It was a grand old home with a cracked exterior, vines crawling up the sides, and windows that seemed to stare out with long-forgotten secrets. Everyone said I was crazy for buying it, but I saw potential. I imagined filling the rooms with warmth and laughter, creating new memories in a place that had long been abandoned. I decided to invite a few friends over to celebrate. The evening started off like any other housewarming party. We drank wine, laughed, and marveled at the high ceilings and antique features of the house. The living room was alive with conversation, the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the sound of joy, but there was something about the house, something off. I could feel it even though I tried to push it away, an odd sensation that gnawed at the back of my mind. It wasn't until later in the evening that I noticed it. A strange whisper, like the soft rustle of leaves, but more distinct. It came from somewhere in the hallway, just outside the living room. I thought I was imagining it at first, convinced it was the wind or maybe the house settling in the damp weather. But as the minutes passed, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Sarah, Sarah. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was faint but unmistakable, my name. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. My friends heard nothing, or if they did, they brushed it off as a draft or one of those odd sounds old houses tend to make. But I couldn't let it go. The whispers continued, growing clearer with each passing moment. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my chest, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Sarah, you okay? It was Jamie, a close friend, who noticed I had stopped talking. She waved a hand in front of my face, and I snapped out of my trance. I smiled weakly, trying to mask my discomfort. Yeah, just a little tired, I guess, I said, brushing it off. But then, just as I was about to turn back to my guests, it came again, the whisper. Only this time it was closer. Sarah. I looked up at Jamie, whose face was full of concern now. What's wrong? She asked. I didn't know how to explain it to her. How could I possibly put into words that someone was calling my name from the hallway? I excused myself, telling my friends I'd be back in a minute. I needed to investigate. I needed to understand what was happening. I could feel my pulse quicken as I moved toward the hallway. The dark corridor that seemed to stretch forever in the shadows. The flickering light bulbs above added to the eeriness, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. My heart was pounding in my ears as I stepped cautiously forward. I passed by the door to a bedroom that was slightly ajar. As I did, the whispering came again, sharp and clear this time. Sarah, it was coming from inside the room. My stomach twisted in dread, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. Slowly, I reached out and opened the door. The room was bathed in a soft, ghostly moonlight, the kind that made everything appear pale and unreal. There was an antique vanity against one wall, its mirror cracked and jagged, reflecting only a sliver of the room. Dust hung in the air like forgotten memories. I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. My breath came out in shallow gasps as the door crept shut behind me, its heavy thud echoing through the room. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, the air thick with cold. I could see my breath puffing out in front of me like smoke. And then the whispering escalated, shifting from one voice to a chorus of frantic murmurs, a constant babble of anguish. The voices overlapped each other, rising in volume, until they were all I could hear, all I could feel. Sarah. I turned sharply, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as my eyes darted around the room. That's when I saw her. In the corner of the room, standing motionless, was a woman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, tattered and worn. Her hair, dark and wild, fell around her face in unkempt strands. Her eyes, wide and hollow, fixed onto me with an intensity that froze my blood in my veins. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, suddenly, she sobbed a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the room. The grief in her cry was so raw, so agonizing, that I felt it in my bones. I wanted to run. I should have run. But I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from hers, from the emptiness in her gaze. And then, in an instant, she lunged at me, her arms stretched out, her mouth opening wide in a soundless scream. I staggered backward, my feet slipping on the floor, but before I could react, she disappeared, as though she had never been there at all. The room went silent. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I turned, stumbling toward the door, but the moment my hand touched the doorknob, it slammed open on its own, as though the house itself was pushing me out. I stumbled into the hallway, and there, standing frozen in place, were my friends. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale, their mouths agape in shock. They didn't speak, just stared at me as though they had seen a ghost. And, in a way, they had. What the hell happened? Jamie whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't answer. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't even know if it was real. I felt detached from my own body, like I was floating outside of myself, unable to grasp the reality of the situation. Before I could say another word, I looked down at my hands, and they were shaking, trembling uncontrollably. And in that moment, I realized something. I couldn't remember leaving the room. I couldn't remember how I got back to the hallway. It was like I had blacked out, like time had slipped through my fingers. My mind was a blur of images, none of them making sense. The whispers returned then, louder this time, echoing in my ears like 1,000 voices. And the words, they weren't just calling my name anymore. They were demanding it. Sarah, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to my friends, my eyes wide with fear, but they were already backing away, shaking their heads as though they couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Sarah, we need to get out of here, Jamie said, her voice barely audible over the growing sound of the whispers. She grabbed my arm, but I barely registered it. All I could hear was that voice, calling me from the dark. I didn't fight them as they hurried me out of the house. They were frightened, but I was beyond fear. I was numb, my body moving on autopilot, my mind stuck in a loop I couldn't escape. As we left the house and stepped into the cool night air, I realized that the whispers hadn't stopped. They had followed me, lingering in the back of my mind, a constant presence that I couldn't shake. The next morning, My friends found me sitting on the floor, staring blankly at the wall, unable to recall any of what happened after I stepped into the room. They tried to get me to talk, to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't have answers. I couldn't remember. They left in a hurry, and I never went back to that house. It remained empty, abandoned, waiting for the next soul to step inside. The whispers never ceased, and I was left with only fragments of memory I couldn't fully grasp. I can still hear them sometimes, late at night, calling my name, but I don't dare go back.